McFarland, former Deputy National Security Advisor to President Trump. KT, good to see you. Also the author of Revolution, Trump, Washington, and We the People. Good to have you on, KT. What do you make of the Xi Jinping situation?
Well, first of all, to say, there was no occasion to talk. Look, first of all, Xi Jinping, as any leader around the world does, when an American president is sworn in, he immediately gets on the phone and offers a congratulatory phone call. And frankly, Biden hasn't taken the call yet. I think that's a good thing. I think it's a very good thing to keep Xi Jinping a little bit on the outs right now, because Biden, for a couple of reasons. One, Biden has historically been very soft on China. And if he is now going to take a more aggressive tone, as he's talked about taking a more aggressive tone, but if he is going to do that, he shouldn't necessarily. He was saying that he was going to take a tougher stand on China,
right,
that it's going to be great competition, but we'll see. But the other thing is that there have been phone calls, and there was a phone call with the Chinese foreign minister and our Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, and it was pretty frosty by all accounts. I mean, Blinken said pretty straightforwardly, we're going to hold you guys accountable for what you've been doing. And the Chinese foreign minister said, well, we have certain red lines. You better not cross those red lines. And those red lines includes don't muck around with Taiwan, with the Uyghurs, and with Hong Kong. So I think that, everybody's sort of staking out their territory, and we'll see where it goes.
I think they definitely knew going in that everybody was going to be watching how they dealt with China, because there had been so much criticism on that. They knew that if they went in soft, it would probably be a killer. Here is President Biden talking about this exact issue.
He's very bright. He's very tough. He doesn't have, and I don't mean as a criticism, just a reality, he doesn't have a democratic small d bone in his body. I'm not going to do it the way Trump did. We're going to focus on international rules of the road.
So what does that mean? And what does it mean, and how do you actually get China to play by any kind of rules?
Look, the Chinese have said very clearly that the 21st century is the Chinese century. And there are international rules of the road. The Chinese have said these rules of the road are going to have, quote, Chinese characteristics. So they have no intention of playing by the rules of the system that we've set up. They think it disadvantages them, and they plan to replace the United States as the dominant world power within the decade. And then they're going to rewrite all those rules to their advantage and our disadvantage.
Yep.
So, the Chinese, they've got a mission, and they've got their entire government is focused on that mission, whether it's their military, their economy, their politics, their diplomacy. It's all headed in one direction, which is to replace the United States as the dominant world power.
Yeah, and they've got, 3-4 times as many people as we do, too, which is scary.
Yeah.
Top union leader, AFL-CIO President Richard Trumka had a lot to say. This is somebody Biden really needs in his corner. Upset with Joe Biden about stopping the Keystone Pipeline. Take a listen to this from Axios.
I wish he hadn't done that on the first day, because the Laborers International was right. It did and will cost us jobs in the process. I wish he had paired that more carefully with the thing that he did second by saying, here's where we're creating jobs. We can do mine reclamation, we can fix leaks, and we can fix seeps and create hundreds of thousands of jobs in doing all of that stuff.
So Biden pandering to the environmentalist side of the party, I think he dug himself quite a hole here. What do you think?
Yeah. And the Keystone Pipeline, that's a big issue for a couple of reasons. I mean, number one, as Trump was saying, it costs American jobs, right? Americans are now going to be out of work. But the other part is that because we have access to either send it south in the pipeline to the United States, we don't want it. They're going to send it west, and they're going to send it to the Pacific, and they're going to send it to China. So at the end of the day, that oil is going to be used. Those greenhouse gases are going to be released. And who's going to benefit by canceling the Keystone Pipeline? The Chinese. And that's, again, another problem. It's not just economic, it's not just environmental, but it's international.
Yeah. There's a report out, a UN report, that says that North Korea developed nuclear missile programs last year, which is interesting for a lot of different reasons. Obviously, Trump was still in the White House. What is this? What do you make of this? And what do you think Kim Jong-un thinks of this transition into Joe Biden's presidency?
Well, with Kim Jong-un, and if the North Koreans are headed in that direction, we don't have a whole lot of leverage left. If we really want to make it stop, we have to get the Chinese to stop the North Koreans, because the Chinese subsidize and underwrite the entire North Korean economy.
Sure.
And it doesn't look like we're going to get the North Koreans separate from China anytime soon. And it doesn't look like we're going to be able to pressure China to do anything about helping us on North Korea.
Interesting. Okay. A little foreign policy hodgepodge tonight. KT, good to see you as always.
It's great to see you. Thanks, Rod.
Take care. All right. Great news for Christians in the state of California. You can now pray inside a church again. It's been a long time. That decision coming down from the Supreme Court. We're going to talk about what the court decided, what it means for religious liberty in the age of COVID lockdowns. That's a huge win for First Amendment rights. California residents had been banned from going to church for more than 6 months. The ban is now over. The unconstitutional ban was put into place by none other than the governor there, Gavin Newsom, who's inching closer to a recall vote every day as that gains steam. To talk more about this story, our next guest, host of the Eric Metaxas radio show and author of the new book, Fish Out of Water, A Search for the Meaning of Life, Eric Metaxas. Good to see you, Eric.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course. What do you think of this big decision from the Supreme Court?
Whoop-de-doo, as Archie Bunker used to say. It's meaningless. It's 25% is a joke. You know, it's sort of like, well, we're dealing with California. I live in New York.
Okay.
And blue states are even more out of touch than most of our leaders with the heartland of America. There's just no question, since the beginning of our country, from before the beginning, faith was utterly central to who we are as a people. And even more importantly, it's central to freedom, virtue, faith, freedom. These things work together. Tocqueville talked about it in 1826. He was bowled over. There's never been a country really that has taken faith an animus against people of faith. They sneer at it, and this is a way that they can exercise their power. And it's wrong on a number of levels. So it's a tiny incremental positive thing.
You feel that all the time. They definitely, I think they look at it with disdain. If they're not of faith themselves, they just think it's all really stupid. And I think you can feel that in the way that they make decisions like this. Eric Rasbach is the vice president of the Becket Fund. That's a nonprofit organization, defends religious liberty for all. It's the firm that was litigating this specific case in the Supreme Court. He tweeted out, it's a huge win for religious liberty. 40 million people live in California. Most haven't been able to worship together for a half a year. SCOTUS has vindicated a core First Amendment right.
Well, listen,
now, obviously, and hang on one second. I just want to say the left would argue, I mean, he's obviously more proud of it. You don't think it's as good of a deal, but the left would say that it's a pandemic. This is meant to save lives. Why are they wrong?
The left would say I'm a violent insurrectionist. They're out of their heads, and you have to say that. They're out of their heads. First of all, the Becket Fund, they're total heroes, and they take on these battles. But the Becket Fund are heroes. God bless them for doing this. And half a loaf is better than none, and 25% of a loaf is better than none. But what I'm saying is that in America, people of faith see their faith as utterly central. This is not a tag-on thing. This is not my activity on Sundays. And the idea that during a pandemic, people have not had the freedom and the recourse to go to places to worship is scandalous. This is a free country. This is not a country where the leaders get to decide everything based on some phony metric of a disease. Just because the disease is real, heart disease is real. There are many things that are real, many causes of death. They've been very heavy-handed. They have an animus. It seems to me that they demonstrate against people of faith. And I think some of them are shaking their fists at God. I really think that they sneer at the whole idea. It's simply wrong a year into this to consider it a big win that 25% of people can go to church.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. We don't have a lot of time left. I just want to ask you real quick about the book, Fish Out of Water, A Search for the Meaning of Life. Tell us about this.
Well, I guess it gets to the point I was making. I grew up going to church, but I didn't realize, because I grew up in sort of secular New York and Connecticut, I didn't realize what you could really know. I just thought faith is one of those things that, you know, it's some cerebral thing. Some people get it, some don't. Yeah. And so because of that, I struggled. But at the end of the book, I tell what amounts to an outrageous miracle story where God shows up in my life in a way that, as far as I'm concerned, it was utterly, instantly life-changing. And I think that, especially during times like these, we need God. And in writing the book, I want people to know that even if you're not looking for God, he's there. He wants us to look for him. But I just want to say that there are certain things that are endlessly wonderful. And the God of the Bible, he's available to everybody. And I was a skeptic. I didn't get it. So if he was available to me, I just want to encourage people that it's possible. And it's just a wonderful thing, no matter what you're going through.
That's a great message. That is a great message. Eric Metaxas, thank you so much for the time.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Coming up, at just 20 years old, Parkland school shooting survivor David Hogg, already a big voice for the left. Now he wants to crush might. Happy Monday. We knew who was going to win the Super Bowl last night by the third quarter, and we knew the outcome of Trump's impeachment trial 2 weeks ago. That's not stopping Democrats from forging ahead, though, and wasting everybody's time. Donald Trump stands accused of inciting an insurrection January 6th. The former president had the audacity to tell a crowd of peacefully and patriotically make their voices heard the day Congress certified the Electoral College. Sadly, a small faction of that crowd took things way too far, but the left doesn't see it that way. Democrats have accused the president of aiming a violent mob at the Capitol like a cannon. Obviously, the two sides are miles apart on this subject, but ostensibly you'd think Democrats are winning this argument because they've gotten support from weaker Republicans like Mitt Romney and Liz Cheney. Well, that is meaningless. Just remember Mitt Romney marched in a BLM protest. You remember that. If you took the politics out of this trial and decided it's simply based on evidence, it would be a joke. Sure, there are legal scholars saying all day that Trump's clearly guilty. These days, you can find a, quote, expert partisan hack to say just about anything you want. CNN and MSNBC are pros at all that. Half of their economic experts are socialists. What does that tell you? But back to impeachment. In reality, the best argument Democrats have is that Trump went too far in his claims of election fraud. They've lost their mind trying to stretch that out into incitement of an insurrection. And they're going full press on this while ignoring their own much more malicious statements in the past. Chuck Schumer's comments towards conservative Supreme Court justices last year were 10 times worse than Donald Trump's. Take a listen.
I want to tell you, Gorsuch, I want to tell you, Kavanaugh, you have released the whirlwind, and you will pay the price.
So that's Chuck Schumer 1 year ago. Yet Schumer still managed to say this today with a straight face. Take a listen.
The political right has been searching for a safe harbor, a way to oppose the conviction of Donald Trump without passing judgment on his conduct, to avoid alienating the former president's supporters, without condoning his obviously despicable, unpatriotic, undemocratic behavior. But the truth is, no such safe harbor exists.
It's quite a difference, isn't it? Maxine Waters literally called on her supporters to harass members of the Trump team in public. Was Maxine then? Here's Maxine now.
He absolutely should be charged with premeditated murder because of the lives that were lost with this invasion, with this insurrection.
All right, so the point is this. These are not serious people. They're politicians doing what politicians do, being dramatic and being ridiculous. At the end of the day, they know the case is a loser politically. That's why they're now trying to make this trial as short as possible. Senator Richard Blumenthal said over the weekend, Democrats don't want to over-try and add witnesses for the trial to simply prove the obvious. That's Blumenthal's hilarious attempt to cover up the real reason Democrats don't want any witnesses. They know they're destined to lose anyway. They want to get out of this as soon as possible. They probably wish they hadn't started it. We've all heard what Trump said on January 6th. Everybody's heard it by now. The left is on Mars at this point. Here's Republican Senator Lindsey Graham on CBS.
It's not a crime. I mean, the House is impeaching him under the theory that his speech created a riot. When you look at the facts, many people had already planned to attack the Capitol before he ever spoke.
So in response to that defense, Democrats now say Trump's crime was a pattern of comments for weeks leading up to that day. They're grasping at straws yet again. Today, Press Secretary Jen Psaki was asked about all this.
Does the president have plans to watch any of the trial this week? And does the White House prefer a speedy impeachment trial?
Well, first, the president himself would tell you that we keep him pretty busy, and he has a full schedule this week. He will not spend too much time watching the proceedings of any time over the course of this week. He will remain closely in touch with Speaker Pelosi, Leader Schumer, a range of officials on the Hill.
Okay, there you go. You can tell the Biden team isn't too keen on this whole idea, likely because it's taking all the attention away from them. Trump, of course, is an attention vacuum. Nothing else can exist in the room when he is there. Today, as Biden landed at the White House, the first question that he was hit with, of course, about Donald Trump.
Look, we've got an offer to come and testify. We've decided not to. We'll let the Senate work that out. Thank you.
All right, so the Trump show comes back to town tomorrow, but the star himself will likely be playing golf at his club when it starts. Regardless, the Democrat impeachment managers and Trump's attorneys had a nice little back and forth on all of this. The Trump said it was all in written letters. The Trump team said, in this country, the Constitution, not a political party and not politicians, reigns supreme. But through this latest article of impeachment, now before the Senate, Democrat politicians seek to carve out a mechanism by which they can silence a political opponent and a minority party. Democrats responding to that. The House did not impeach Trump because he expressed an unpopular opinion. It impeached him because he willfully incited violent insurrection against the government. Trump team firing back to that. This process will provide us with an opportunity to explain to senators why it's absurd and unconstitutional to hold an impeachment trial against a private citizen. So all of that on the eve of this big trial, which will start tomorrow. Our next guest, though, is perfect to discuss this. Congresswoman-elect Claudia Tenney from the state of New York joins us now. Her race was the last to be called from the 2020 election. She won by just 109 votes. And funny enough, Democrats were throwing around claims of fraud and election irregularities in her election. Congresswoman, thanks for coming on. It's good to talk with you. Congratulations on the win, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you. It's great to be on.
Of course. Yeah, it's good to have you. More on that in just a minute on your big win. But first, I just want to get initially your thoughts on tomorrow's trial. What do you make of it?
Well, I think this is absurd. I'm also an attorney, and I can't believe we're having this charade when the House process didn't have witnesses, didn't allow the president to have legal counsel. There was no due process, and basically it's what would be a grand jury or an indictment that would send the conviction the indictment over to the Senate, and nothing was had. There was no due process. The thing that scares me the most about this is that if we can deny due process to the president of the United States, what are we going to say to the people that live in my community, the poor guy who can't afford an attorney, or someone who is, in a small city and has committed maybe a minor crime? We're just going to say, we can't afford this to the president, so we're not going to give it to you either. And then the absurdity of all, now we're going to have a trial over someone who we literally cannot prosecute with the penalty that they're asking for, right, because the penalty is removal and he's gone. Yeah. And so they're just putting on a charade. They're keeping the razor wire and all the guards all around the Capitol. And I wonder how long after this impeachment charade is over that all that starts to come down, because that's for show. That's part of the set they're putting on for this Hollywood production of impeachment.
It's a good point. I'm curious about that myself. Thanks to Rand Paul, though, and what he did a couple of weeks ago, it's clear that there's not going to be a conviction, even if it is a meaningless conviction, which makes a lot of people wonder, why did they continue down the path after Rand Paul had that big vote on whether or not it's constitutional?
Yeah, of course. They're doing this for a show. They're trying to condemn President Trump and really condemning his voters. They think if they get rid of Trump, they're somehow going to get rid of conservatives and Republicans. It's kind of like getting rid of Rush Limbaugh and saying there's going to be no more ditto heads. These people sought out President Trump. They were attracted to him and his mission because of what he stood for. He made promises. He kept them. He was a business person. He didn't give a lot of this kind of nonsense that you're seeing in right, politics right now. I feel like my affinity for President Trump was I was a business owner. I get tired of politicians. I just wanted, you're going to tell me you're going to lower my taxes, Don't give me some song and dance when you go to Albany or Washington or whatever it would be. That's what people like about Trump.
Yeah, I mean, it is. And I think, honestly, when you looked at the way government returned to so quickly, just being this big, bureaucratic, feckless machine under Biden, all the same kind of tricks are back. And it all just does seem so stupid in so many ways. I want to talk about your race here, which was just insanely close in your district in New York. 100 votes, something like that?
109.
109. And there's allegations of fraud by the Democrats. Talk about the irony of your race in the shadow of what's happening to Donald Trump right now.
Yeah, what's really interesting in my race, you heard that there was Stickygate, where objections weren't on a ballot. We had one county that had a malware shutdown, so they weren't available even for a month or so. Yeah. We had just about everything you can think of, but we really didn't have the so-called widespread fraud. Those are incitement words, by the way. Widespread fraud. You have to have a Twitter warning if you or dare say something like that. What we had was a tremendous bureaucratic nightmare. All these people who run the boards of election were overwhelmed by executive orders from Andrew Cuomo, which put them in so much pressure. In a presidential year, we had these no excuse absentee voting. We had an online portal where people could get absentee ballots without even having to prove anything but a name, address, and a phone number, which, third parties would have been able to do that. We also had, just about every, ballots were found on shelves in boxes weeks and months after Election Day. We finally got somewhere with this. But what ended up happening is now it's going to be 94 days before our judge came up with a decision. And what's really ironic is that Mark Elias, who is the lead attorney for Perkins Coie, who is also the lead attorney for all of the presidential race, and also, comes from the famous Perkins Coie law firm, which created the Steele dossier. They basically came out after the judge ruled that we were the winners to appeal this, saying there were Dominion voting machine irregularities, there were fraud, they needed a hand count, everything, all this 90 days after we've been through an exhaustive judicial review of this. Now, remember, this entire recount that I've been through has been under the auspices of a judge. A judge has had oversight.
Funny about it. That's such
it's
a great
incredible
story. You want to make election integrity one of your biggest priorities. Tell me what you want to do.
Well, obviously now that's because I didn't expect myself to be in this, but actually I've thought about it for a long time. One of the biggest problems we have is that we have no definition and no of what the role of people who should oversee elections are. Right now, under New York law, Article 2 is it's the second most important article. It's about suffrage. It's about voting. And it puts the integrity of maintaining our voter rolls squarely at the obligation of the Board of Elections. The Democrats have tried every way to blur this line, to put government officials, whether it's the Department of Motor Vehicles, now they want colleges and universities to oversee our elections and the integrity of our voter lists. This is something that is just going to make it even harder to make sure that each vote is counted, and only once, by the way. And they, are banning voter ID. We must have voter ID. I think that was probably the single most important element of maintaining voter integrity. There are so many ways the Democrats are trying to undermine this, and a lot of people should be cautioned. It is not necessarily fraud. It's a legalized system of mass confusion and chaos where government agencies are not able to handle the task. And by handing it over and diffusing it through various agencies, instead of keeping one agency that has become expert at it and an agency that's going to be able to have the resources, it's going to be diffused over so many, and there's going to be so much room for even more error. And what they're proposing is going to make the situation that I just went through for 97 days even worse. So we've got to have voter ID. We've got to make sure that we have one agency handling this, an agency that is nonpartisan but also has oversight. And I think in that way we could probably come up with a lot more integrity in our votes.
Okay. You're right. I mean, it's all political. If they were losing elections because of all this stuff, they'd be fighting for it just the same way you guys are. That's what's so funny about the whole thing. Congresswoman-elect Claudia Tenney, State of New York. Good to see you. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay, the big Trump trial starts tomorrow. Are Democrats set to embarrass themselves and waste a week of their time and your money? We have a panel to debate the reasoning for this trial and some of the constitutional all that analysis is coming up here with a couple of experts. That's coming up here in a bit. Plus, Donald Trump was really tough on China. Wasn't afraid to say so either. Joe Biden, though, still hasn't called Xi Jinping. Doesn't really like talking about it too much. Biden questioned on China. What to make of his answer? That's later in the show. All right, welcome back. You can't impeach a president once he is out of office. That is going to be one of the main components of President Trump's impeachment defense tomorrow. Meanwhile, House Democrats will try to show that President Trump's words incited the January 6th Capitol riot. To discuss more about how this second impeachment for Donald Trump will unfold, we're joined by two experts on the Constitution. Trent England is the executive director of Save Our States, and Ilya Shapiro, director of the Robert A. Levy Center for Constitutional Studies. Gentlemen, welcome. Thanks for coming on. Trent, I want to start with you. How strong is the president's case?
Well, I think the constitutional case that's going to be debated tomorrow is actually fairly weak. The fact that the Constitution allows not just removing someone from office, but also prohibiting someone from holding office in the future, the first penalty being automatic and the second penalty being at the option of the Senate if they convict, does imply that you actually could, you can do that to someone who's out of office. So, I think it's a close case. There's scholarship on both sides, but I think ultimately the stronger case is, it's up to the Senate, and the Constitution does not explicitly prohibit them from impeaching someone who's out of office.
Okay, interesting. Ilya, you've said on the constitutional merits of impeachment, you've said the Constitution is ambiguous in this case, and since it's not a court of law, the charge against Trump is political, not criminal, which I think we all know that by now. But you're more convinced by the arguments in favor of impeaching Donald Trump. You think that that's a stronger case. Why is that?
Yeah, well, I agree with what Trent said in terms of the possibility of trying and convicting a former official. Doesn't have to be a president, it can be any kind of former official. The Constitution is ambiguous, it's not clear, and it's not clear cut. It's not a slam dunk argument either way on that jurisdictional point.
Yeah.
In terms of the merits, the Democrats could have done a much better job in terms of how they drew up the impeachment articles. Well, there's only one article just about the speech he gave and whether that incited the mob to sack the Capitol. But the impeachment managers and the brief that they filed and what we're going to see over the next week is going to be a narrative about all of his behavior in the post-election time in terms of whipping up inflaming public passions and then on the actual day not defending the Capitol, those sorts of things. So I think it is a serious breach of the public trust, which is ultimately how you translate that old-timey high crime and misdemeanor language.
Trent, how tough is it for Democrats to actually prove, though, that Donald Trump's speech incited a riot? Because that's what this is all about, right?
That's right, and I completely agree with Ilya. I think that the way the Democrats have presented this is a big mistake. We Americans tend to be very lawyerly people, and they've used some very lawyerly language in the complaint that they're bringing in the Senate. The problem with that is that impeachment is both legal and political, and to make it, to use all of these legal terms of art means that they're setting actually, I think, a higher bar for themselves than they would otherwise have to. The founders knew that impeachment would be a political process. That would not surprise James Madison or any of the other founders, and so I think that it's the Democrats have created a scenario where it's actually going to be fairly hard for them to convince people that a speech somehow, this speech rises to the level of incitement. That those are technical legal terms. On the other hand, it's easy for, I think, a lot of Americans to look at what happened and wish that the president maybe had acted a little bit differently, right? And so I think that the Democrats are going to be walking a very fine line here. They could easily wind up being hoisted by their own petard.
Yeah. I mean, Ilya, when you look at the fact that you've already had 45 members of the Senate on the Republican side say it's unconstitutional, you just kind of wonder, is this all just a big waste of time?
Well, it may turn out to be that way. I mean, at this point, once you've impeached a president, now, of course, he's no longer president, but once it's been delivered to the Senate, they have to act on it. They have to treat it seriously. And I think most people in the country feel that this charge is much more serious than the first impeachment, which is kind of a he said, she said, obscure phone call with a foreign leader. This we all were watching the events of January 6th. And does Trump's culpability rise to the level of an impeachable offense, of something that is, deserves a serious punishment, disqualification, and all the rest of it? And so they have to go through with it. And that's why the impeachment managers are going to be saying, look, we're not bringing a legal case. We're bringing this political case of impeachment. They're going to try to sway some more of those Republicans. It's going to be a tough road. I honestly can't see. They need 17 Republicans, and only 5 even found it to be constitutional to continue having this trial. So, at the end of the day, it might be something very short and with not any different of a result than we could predict right now.
Yeah. I mean, Trent, I don't think it's going to last more than a week. I think they're expecting that, just a couple of days for each side to give their case. Doesn't look like there's going to be witnesses. I mean, when you look at it, just what it is, you had this horrible day on Capitol Hill. You had a speech given by the president before that. But in all the words, I mean, you keep seeing, I mean, the big moments, it was peacefully and patriotically, let's make our voices heard. I really think they bit off more than they could chew here. I think that their anger and their fear from that day just got the best of them.
Well, I think the best historical analogy is the Clinton impeachment, right? The average American looked at what Bill Clinton did. They were disgusted. They were appalled, right? The average American looks at what happened on January 6th, and they're appalled. They're horrified, right? But the problem is the Clinton impeachment, I think forcing Americans to relive all of that and sort of hyping it up into this big legal case against Bill Clinton, a lot of Americans through that process really decided, hey, look, we don't like what the president did, but we think that this process is harming the country. I think what you see Democrats in the Senate recognizing is that very same dynamic, right? If they draw this out, if they sort of, look like they're trying to just rub, America's nose in what happened on January 6th and trying to score political points, I think that public opinion can very easily turn against the Democrats in all of this. And, my sense is we may already see that happening as this process kicks off tomorrow.
Well, I mean, at the same time, the latest polls say something like 56% of Americans want to see him convicted. If this was a secret ballot, you'd see a different result in terms of Republicans voting. We saw that with the vote for Liz Cheney.
But that's the same as the numbers of people that supported and didn't like Donald Trump. I mean, that was it was always around 45, 55, something like that. So Trent England, Ilya Shapiro, good to talk to you guys. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Coming up, Joe Biden making a taped appearance before the Super Bowl. You probably saw it, talking about China.
We need not have a conflict, but there's going to be an extreme competition.
All right, with Trump gone, Xi Jinping licking his lips. China already testing Biden in a couple different ways. Can Joe Biden handle this? We're going to discuss that with President Trump's former Deputy National Security Advisor, KT McFarland, coming up.